All right. So, the other, what is it? It might have been like a month ago now. You had put up a video about how you wanted to ban the Confederate flag outright, right?
Right.
Okay.
Correct. That's correct.
All right. So, if you, I don't know if you want to like give a quick explanation on like how that's been going, or just like a quick
Yeah.
rundown on
So
it.
just to get some background, it's something I've talked about doing for a while, and I'll get into that a little bit later as to why. But background is I have some people I know that know some sitting Congress people, and they've put me in contact with them. And I presented the basic outline of why I believe we could actually get away with banning the Confederate flag.
Mhm.
And those Congress people's aides presented that to them, and they're interested enough to have the conversation. So I'm going to be sitting down with a couple of Congress people. One of them you probably know quite well, but I won't talk about names at the moment. But I'm going to be sitting down with them, and I'm going to be presenting my position as to why I believe we should ban the Confederate flag. And part of giving that some traction was to start the petition, which is why I started the petition. Initially, I wasn't going to do a petition. I didn't really see a need to, but it does. From talking to people, it does give it traction. So I'm trying to work my way towards 100,000 people
Mhm.
at minimum signing that petition, and we're about halfway there.
Okay. And so I'm sure you got some backlash for that from a lot of conservatives, right? I don't know if.
Conservatives, liberals.
Oh
So
yeah.
to clear the air there as well. I don't subscribe to a title or a box or a label.
Sure.
I don't consider myself a liberal. I consider myself pretty radically independent.
Mhm.
That should be a party by itself. And so, yeah, I got plenty of liberals who say to me, bro, you can't ban freedom of expression. Then it opens the gateways, a slippery slope. I get that. And obviously, a lot of conservatives said the same thing. So, sure, I saw your video where you suggested it was performative. It's far from that.
Yeah,
But yeah, there's
well, I don't think that it's like like poorly intentioned, and I want to clarify specifically like my perspective on this thing, right? So first and foremost, like I know that some people say that like it's I don't know. There's some people say that they have reclaimed it for Southern heritage. I don't know how true that is or isn't. I see people claiming that. I wouldn't live and die on that because I don't really, I don't care about the Confederate flag. I do think it's
right.
racist. So my biggest thing is like how, and I would say unintentionally divisive it would be, because I think that right off the bat, like the immediate response, if this got like if this became something that became like a federal conversation, is it's going to be people who want it to be banned versus not. So it's going to be people who want to ban it because it's racist versus people who don't want to ban it because they're racist, maybe people who feel like it represents Southern heritage, and then of course people who want to defend freedom of speech, and they're going to go with the slippery slope argument. And my argument here is that even if we do pass it, what honestly, like what does it really do for the black community?
Good. Well, okay. Well, first, I'm not going to talk about what it does for the black community. So I don't
Mhm.
participate in conversations about what to do with or for the black community because I'm not a
Mhm.
member of the black community. So as me and you two white guys, we're not going to have a conversation about the black community.
Sure. Well,
However,
well.
uh,
Oh yeah, keep going, and then I'll. Okay.
no, I mean, what does it do for America? I'll talk about that.
Sure.
Um, First, we got to understand a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So if we improve America as a whole, then all communities will benefit from that improvement. But let me say this. That question you ask is actually what starts this whole conversation.
Mhm.
What's the purpose? What's it going to do? Well, the purpose is the whole reason that I'm pushing to ban the flag to begin with. So let me go back to me being a child. I was raised in the South. I was raised in the mountains, North Carolina, and that flag was in my front yard. That
Mhm.
flag was in my neighbor's front yard. And I have a really vivid memory of being a child. Everywhere I went down south, people would say, the South will rise again. The South will rise again. And honestly, as a child, you don't think much of it. You just hear it a lot. And one day, as an inquisitive, probably 9, 10-year-old, I asked my dad, like, what does that mean? What is this? Because people said it so much that I really thought that there was a planned something's going to happen where the South is supposed to rise again. And my dad basically told me, he said, son, what's going to happen is there's going to come a time where we're going to have to fight the government because they're trying to make it illegal to be a straight white Christian male. Now, this is in the 80s. This
Mhm.
is not 2020. This is the 80s. This is before any conversation we're currently having. My dad's telling me this in the 80s. Okay. And what I want people to understand, agree or not, about this flag is I'm not approaching this from a conversation of racism. I'm approaching this from a conversation of imminent threat to the United States of America. The foundation of that flag, which I can go well into the history of it, but the foundation of that flag, the resurgence of that flag, and the continued use of that flag has and always will be a threat to the United States. You just said right now it's divisive. You're right, because that flag keeps us divided. So what I'm proposing to you is this. There is no slippery slope of freedom of speech. Every case that goes before the Supreme Court or any justice system in America is a case by case on its own merit basis. So if I can logically show from foundation to resurgence to current times that the very presence of that flag is an imminent threat to the United States, then it is imperative that the United States bans that flag and the ideologies that surround it. It's how you attack the rooted domestic terrorism in our country.
That's very interesting, because I've never seen that kind of a representation from the Confederate flag. Mostly from what I see, and I'm a Northerner, so of course I'm going to have a very different perspective, and maybe the racially charged aspect of that flag doesn't exist as much in the North. Is that it's just a flag that people talk about. It's basically like some kind of redneck culture, at least to people up here, right? So maybe you're actually right about that.
Well, let me speak on that, because you're not wrong. It is a redneck culture, but let me say this. Even in the North, okay, I have associates. I've been around, obviously. I spent 13 years in the Army. I've traveled a couple of days. And I've talked to people from all over, and people, like-minded individuals of myself, people that have also come from this. See, I was raised, pickophobia, pickoism. I was raised that way. I was raised racist. I was raised homophobic. I was raised transphobic. I was raised with all of them, okay? And so a lot of times people hear me talk now and they think I'm just this liberal from Seattle, I guess. But that's not the case. I've actually educated myself out of all the toxic ideologies I was raised from, which is why I'm so emotionally charged on the topics. It has nothing to do with, social activism. I've been doing it for 20 years, nothing to do with TikTok, right? So when I talk to people from the North, like yourself, they'll tell you it's still the same. It just happens more so behind closed doors. And if I ask you this, what is Southern heritage with that flag? There's no Southern heritage. There's no heritage with the flag. There's people that will fight for that flag the same way they'll fight for the United States flag, because they see the flag for what it is, but it has been ingrained into, especially down south, the very education system. You see, racism is merely a one aspect of that flag. The flag itself represents, when they stormed the Capitol on June 6th, one of the most horrifying pictures you'll see from that incident is when they walked through the halls of Capitol Hill holding a Confederate flag. So as long as that flag exists, the imminent threat to the United States of America exists. Donald Trump didn't radicalize people in 4 years. I was told in 1989 that there'll come a day when we're gonna have to fight back, son, because they're making it illegal to be a straight white Christian male. 2021, January 6th, that became a reality, all under the ideology and the teachings that go behind that flag. I'll stop and let you speak for a second. I could go off on another tangent, but I won't.
No, that's perfectly fine. So, yeah, sure. That's an interesting perspective. Like I said, I'm from the North, so we don't see that as much here. So I'm gonna of course I'm gonna take you as very reasonable. I guess the issue that I still see here, and I know that you said you can't speak on what it does for the Black community. I would think that should be a factor when we consider this type of a thing. I understand that we are not part of the Black community, but I know that you're close to Black creators, and there may be a positive there. What I'm afraid of here, though, is that we've acknowledged it's divisive. Whether it's justified, that divisiveness doesn't make it wrong, right? It doesn't mean
we can agree it's divisive, correct?
Yeah, but it does become divisive because, like I said, people have freedom of speech, and then racists, and then whatever. If there's people who say it's, let's just say it's freedom of speech and racist, right? Those people are going to defend it. My thing is let's say we pass this type of thing. We bring a lot of attention to this issue and we pass this. And I asked, what does it truly do for the Black community? Because I think that the biggest problem I have with this is that, one, I think a lot of progressives are going to feel like this is a win when I don't necessarily see the outcome of abolishing racism in the United States. And two, I would argue that racist people having their flag banned would cause them to lash out and commit more racism. And I would imagine they would do that on disproportionately poor Black communities where they're still very much captured by racism or controlled by, like, you know, racist individuals or racist actors within their communities. And that's the biggest issue that I have, is I don't see it as a net gain. And I think that it might be, or either I actually think that it would be better for us to talk about like true solutions to the core of the problems in Black communities, specifically something we really never talk about, which is just financial empowerment of these communities. And like, that's something I'm because I can see a net gain from that just across the board. Whereas I see some negatives from the outcome of banning this flag.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and let's go step by step. Number one, you talk about the communities that fly that flag lashing out. See, that is the actual problem I'm talking about. Sure. Why would they lash out? Because we've continued to allow this flag and the ideologies behind it. Look, the compromise with the South post-Civil War is what gave us Jim Crow. Okay, the resurgence of this flag. See, just for those who, or you may know, but for the sake of those who may not know that are listening, what we now refer to as the Confederate flag was actually the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia. When the Civil War broke out, at that time, it was standard operation on the battlefield to fly your flag so that your army could identify where their people were. And the original flag of the Confederacy, known as the Stars and Bars, looked too much like the American flag, and soldiers were getting confused on the battlefield. So they decided to allow each army to create its own battle flag. So that way it's unique to your army, and then you can identify them. General Robert E. Lee, who you, of course, have heard of, one of the most successful military tacticians of the time, was the general in charge of the Army of Northern Virginia. And they created what's called the Southern Cross, the X, the one you're now familiar with as the Confederate flag. And because his military was so strong and feared, it became a very popular flag across the South. And even Union armies got scared when they saw that flag. So when they remade the national flag of the Confederacy, it's called the Second National Flag of the Confederacy, they used that flag on a white background. They said they use a white background because white supremacy, because the white race is supreme to all other races. So for those who say it's not about racism. And then they put that battle flag of Army of Northern Virginia on there, making it part of the second flag of the Confederacy. So then they lose the Confederate War. We send federal troops down into the South and enforce the policies of free slaves. The last slave was freed in December 1865 in Texas, even though we can talk about how the 13th Amendment truly never freed anybody, but that's another subject. And so then what happened was the South said, look, we want to work with you guys, because at the time, the idea was, let's get over this. Let's heal the wounds of a war and heal this nation. So the South said, if you will take your federal troops out of the South, then we'll work with you. The North agreed to take federal troops out of the newly conquered Southern territories. And then the South started passing Jim Crow laws, segregation. They started putting up these Confederate statues that we now defend so vehemently. They weren't put up until the early 20th century. The Daughters of the Confederacy was formed, and they brought back that flag. That flag had not been brought up at all since the Civil War for 30 years. They brought it back up. They had a whole office that was designed to rewrite the history books in the Southern schools, to change it from the Civil War to the War of Northern Aggression, to make it lighter and easier to swallow for the white community. So all of this happened, and it created that heritage, not hate argument, purely for the purpose of rewriting history. So that's why I laugh when people say, if you tear down statues, it rewrites history. No, the statues were put up as a modus operandi to rewrite history. But that's the first part of your conversation, which is people are going to lash out. Yes, because we've allowed them to go this far with it.
Sure, yeah, but that's the thing. And like I what you're saying, I think is very educational, and it's very much changing my mind about the Confederate flag and this, like, the symbolism in the South. But it doesn't defeat the argument of like the outcomes of banning that flag.
Right. So that was the second part of your conversation. Sure, yeah. I agree. Yeah. So let me talk about that real quick. You got a good point here, okay? Well, you got a point that I want to address. I shouldn't call it a good point. I disagree with it. But the point you're making is that, first of all, the lashing out of the communities that fly that flag, I understand that. But when you talk about the Black community, you said one of the last things you said was financial empowerment of that community. And I'm a huge fan of that conversation, which I find it ironic that I just saw a video on your platform in which you said you would avoid products that were labeled as black owned in a store. When
Sure.
you talk about, now you're talking about financial empowerment of the black community.
Sure. What really quick. Like, and
Please.
like we can have a conversation about that, but
I do.
that's a very heavy pivot, right? Because like
No.
hold
But
on a second.
it's not a pivot, but I'll go ahead.
It is. And the reason I'm going to say that is like, yeah, it doesn't even matter whether it's a joke or not, right? Because it was a joke. It was poorly placed. It was inappropriate for sure. But it doesn't change the financial empowerment argument, right? So it's like it's a side conversation, and it's honestly irrelevant because is financial empowerment like necessary in black communities?
Is it necessary?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Again, I'm very cautious how I talk about black communities because I'm not a member of them. But I will say this in response to that. Let me just say this in response to what you're saying because I understand your question.
Yeah.
We as white America stripped the black community of financial empowerment. We burnt down Black Wall Street in 1921. Mm-hmm. We passed laws that, et cetera. I mean, we can go through all the history. I'm sure you're aware of it. And we can agree that we stripped the black community of financial empowerment. And that's a huge piece. That's a huge piece of equity, right? I talk a lot about equality isn't enough. It has to be equity. Equality without equity is useless. Okay.
Sure.
So obviously, do I believe that financial empowerment of the black community will begin to resolve a lot of the issues that we as the white community created? Absolutely. I agree with that, which is why I support the proposal to label things as black owned or any minority owned, right? So that's why I support that. But however, to tie that in with the banning of the Confederate flag, I want to be very clear. My reasoning for banning this flag is to root out the toxic ideologies that were built into our community on purpose. It wasn't by accident. And that still exists today. Those same ideas are what radicalized what we now call Trump supporters. Those same ideas exist. And so let me give you an example. I was in the military. I went to combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of the things, and I was there when the war started. I joined the military before 9/11. And one of the things that we had to do as a military was to change our battlefield, the way we operate on the battlefield, because it was no longer conventional warfare. They weren't wearing uniforms and us wearing uniforms. That's not what was happening. What was happening was they were mixed in with the general population, looked the same as the general population, and we had to identify the threat, and we were being killed by roadside bombs, et cetera, et cetera. So the military came up with what's called military operations in an urban terrain. It's how we operated in the global war on terrorism. And what we learned was to root out the people that was within the population that was there to hurt us because they're not wearing uniforms anymore. We had to win the hearts and minds of the community. Because if the community sided with us more than they sided with Al-Qaeda, then they would rat them out and then we could get them out, right? But if they sided with Al-Qaeda more than they sided with them, so using that same military operation in urban terrain, we have to attack our own population that same way. We have to root out what is giving them recruitment tools. The flag is a recruitment tool. And that's why this is a step in this process, not the whole process.
Sure. Okay. Now, those are great points, but like when the immediate impact of this thing, I don't think that trumps what I had said, right? So I genuinely feel that this is going to give progressives and liberals satisfaction on something that doesn't really have a profound impact other than perpetuating more violence in these communities due to lashing out. And I think that it would be better usage of our time to start with like the true issue of like redistributing wealth into black areas, or really poor areas in general, or black areas. And that's where I'm focused more on, because when we look at it, it's incredibly well-intentioned. It may actually be a positive, but again, like I'm seeing these negatives of like, I absolutely do see a lot of progressives, I'm not talking about you, but a lot of other progressives are like, oh, look, we got to win for the black community. Let's stop caring, because historically it's been incredibly difficult to get any progress for the black community. And then at the same time, like perpetuation of violence by lashing out. And that's my biggest issue, is I focus on very heavily on the outcome of what's going to happen. We're going to see divisiveness, laziness from progressives who are just very disconnected from the true experiences of these issues, and just like more violence. And that's where I focus more than anything else on this. And I think that if we have
if the conversation is about the way forward to fix the problems in America that negatively affect all communities, to include the black community, then there's other things we can do. But the banning of the flag, I'm telling you, this has nothing to do with the black community. has everything to do
But
with
shouldn't it have to do? What do you mean it has nothing to do with the black community?
the conversation, especially the one that I'm having to ban this flag, is not targeted as a way to help the black community. It's targeted as a way to help America root out a toxic ideology that's existed for over 150 years and is more harm than good and is an imminent threat to us. Now, is there a portion of that conversation which is related to racism and ipso facto related to the black community? Yes.
I think that's the most important part of this, though, right? Like so that flag very heavily represents like slavery and like negatively impacting black people. So I think that the forefront of the argument should be black communities. Like that should be, when we move forward with any of these things, the number one thing we should be moving forward with is how does it impact the black community? And
should that be a part of the conversation? 1,000%.
I think that's the whole conversation.
And as we move forward to it, but it's not the whole conversation. What I'm saying, that's a part of the conversation. And as we move forward, when that conversation happens, there should be members and leaders within the black community that come forward and have that conversation with us. I won't have that conversation. I'm not a member of the black community. So let me give a little piece of your argument and give you some merit to what you're saying. There are people in the black community that say, listen, if that flag goes away, now I don't know who the racists are. It helps identify the neighborhoods to avoid, et cetera, et cetera. And, and I would like to have that conversation with members of the black community, because my argument is those neighborhoods exist because we continue to allow them to exist. So I understand there could potentially be negative effects to the black community. What they are, that is up to the black community to have that conversation. And it needs to be a part of it. Yes.
It's unfortunate. Like, I understand we're not black, but it's unfortunate that you seem to be very resistant to talking about this from the perspective of black people, when like those are the people who are going to be mostly impacted by this. Like, that is, like, again, the satisfaction argument where liberals are going to stop caring about black people again. Because they think they got to win, and there's going to be more violence on black communities. And I think that by constantly kind of removing black people from this argument, you're kind of just erasing black issues in this argument.
No, I'm just not going to have a conversation.
I know that it's like a well-intentioned thing you're saying, but again, like, we're just,
it's not intention. It's intentional.
Yes, that's what intention means. No, I know, and I know it's well-intentioned. I know that you're intentionally doing it. But what I'm saying is that we're simply. Your entire argument just completely rejects any conversation about how it's going to impact black people.
Okay, I could very conversely say by doing nothing, it continues to affect black people. Listen, at the end of the day,
sure, but we're talking about what we should do.
This would be a violent departure from the idea of even hate speech is protected speech. It would be a violent departure from that. I understand that, but at some point, we've got to make the decision to unfuck what we fucked. That's
right,
what
but this isn't the best first step, and that's the argument that I'm making. The best first step is, like, honestly, like, money is an incredible power, and that's the first step, and that's a conversation that we're avoiding. Hold on a second.
That statement as to why. Then if that's the best first step, let's talk about that.
Sure.
Let's talk about.
I do it a lot. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I also do it a lot. Right. So let's talk about that. So. How is your stance that avoiding black-owned companies?
Well, but this is what I'm talking about, right? So it's kind of like a pivot conversation.
It's not a pivot.
Yeah, no, it is, right? So
we're not going to avoid. No, what we're not going to do is say that this is the best first step, and then the very proposal.
Right. So sure. So that video, would you like to specifically talk about that video?
Sure, that's a good start.
Sure, that was a joke at the end of the video. That's pretty much my whole.
But what's the joke? I don't get the joke.
Yeah, the joke is like you're not going to buy things from marginalized groups. It's a racist joke. Yeah.
No, you said you weren't going to buy them. So now you're telling your platform of 2 million people that you support not buying those products.
Sure, right? and that's a fantastic, fair criticism. That is a great criticism of that.
Yeah. No, aside from criticism, I'm saying it's tone deaf. Right.
Sure.
So you want to know what's negatively affecting black communities?
Sure.
Is tone deaf conversations that are ignoring the true struggles of the black community. So we have to root out ideologies, period.
Well, sure, right. So, like, your argument that, like, listen, your joke landed very poorly and had a profoundly negative impact to your audience. That's a great argument. Yeah, sure. And you're absolutely correct. Yeah. I have no defense for that, but that doesn't change the fact that we need to focus on wealth redistribution first.
But aren't we doing that? Like, aren't we doing that by proposing that we label companies black owned and other
Sure.
minority
Yeah.
owned
No,
companies.
it's a good, yeah, no, it's a good thing to do that. Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the first step that's already been taken.
But that's not a sweeping legislation.
I
And
also believe in reparations, and we should do
sure,
reparations.
we should have a
As a board
yeah,
member.
sure, we could have a conversation about how we should implement reparations for sure.
Right. Very complex conversation, a lot of nuances, but it definitely should happen.
Sure. No, right. So we're agreeing. What I'm saying is that like the first step, like if there's going to be a giant campaign to try to ban the Confederate flag, when we know that the outcome, or we can make a reasonable assumption that the outcome is going to be progressives and Democrats not caring about black issues because they feel like they got to win, that ends up just perpetuating violence in the black community. I don't think that's a good. Yeah, I don't think that's a good first start. I genuinely think that if we're going to signal boost anything, that we should signal boost things that can actually happen and that aren't as divisive. I don't think that wealth redistribution is as divisive as a conversation as banning the Confederate flag, because again, racists are going to defend the flag.
Wealth redistribution is an incredibly divisive conversation, and
I don't think so.
It shouldn't be. I agree.
No,
with
sure,
you.
but I've had a lot of luck convincing a lot of conservatives and getting their minds around things like universal basic income, universal preschools, universal healthcare with a private and public option, prison reform. A lot of conservatives agree that prison reform really is just modern day slavery, decriminalization of drugs, so drug reform. These aren't as divisive of conversations, I think, that people think that they are.
And those conversations are already happening, and they're going to continue to happen, and we're going to continue to push them. And I'm going to continue to be a part of those conversations as I focus on everything. I can multitask and do multiple things
for sure.
But what I'm saying is, I understand why you see the step to ban the flag as a radical step forward that could be divisive. I understand that.
I don't know that it's radical. I think idealistically, I think that what you're saying, like after this conversation that we had from a purely idealistic perspective, I'm 100% on your side. The only thing I'm afraid of are the negative impacts of, like, again, liberal satisfaction and not caring anymore, and violence.
Why we do risk mitigation, right? Expecting those outcomes. I agree with you in terms. This is why I don't like the Democratic Party. See, people. I get to have this conversation a lot. It's kind of fun because people always think I'm a Democrat, so it's an easy segue into the conversation. But I'm not a Democrat. And the one thing I hate about the Democratic Party is they always want to be the agents for change, but then equality is where they stop, and they never go to equity, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The Democratic Party, Republican Party is this. Democratic Party lied to the black community and say they're going to help them, but then don't. And then the Republican Party just doesn't help the black community, and they never lie about it. So that's really the difference.
I would like to further that, where the Democratic Party helps black people as much as they feel they need to get them to vote for them, and Republicans don't even bother giving a shit enough to try to get their vote because they feel like they can't. I think that's like that's that's what I would say. Sure, right. I think that like there hasn't really been any progress for black people in the United States without it benefiting like the ruling class, not even white people, like just the ruling class.
But white people are the ruling class. That's what we.
Sure. I think that, like, sure, rich white people are the ruling class. But I think that it's reasonable to start like creating a separation between all white people and like rich white people who are intentionally like keeping the system the way that it is. Right?
I believe that's fair. But however, that kind of leads into it kind of bleeds over into a conversation you hear a lot, and I have this conversation a lot, where white people say that's not all white people, right?
Sure.
And I don't like that conversation. I don't like that statement because it's dismissive of the fact that this is a continual white problem. What I think, okay, this is different from legislation, because let's go back. This is another thing I was going to mention earlier when you were talking, is you said something to the effect of abolishing racism. You can't abolish racism. You can't legislate morality, right?
I don't know if I said that, but sure.
You did, whether intentional or not. But it just made me want to make the point that you can't abolish it, right? Which I'm sure you understand.
Oh well, yeah, sure. I just don't know if I said that, but yeah, you can't abolish racism. Yeah,
right,
sure.
Right. And you can't legislate morality. And while I understand the argument you're making now, which is that of classism very much exists. And if you're a member of a certain class, you will benefit more regardless of your race within that class than someone of the lower class.
Sure.
But the truth is that racism trumps classism, because even those of, let's use black people, for example, even a black person in a higher class bracket still has to deal with racism. So it's like, if you're a poor black person, you're going to be worse off than a poor white person.
I would say that I don't know that I necessarily accept that as like an absolute truth, that if you're a rich black person, you're going to face, racism, or at least to the same intensity of as a poor black person. I think this definitely depends on what environment you're also like brought up in. Like you said, that there seems to be just like even deeper and worse systemic issues in the South than in the North, which clearly myself as a Northerner and like myself as a Northerner is disconnected from, right?
Sure.
Which makes perfect sense, and it's very educational, and it's actually very much appreciated. But like I said, I don't think that we necessarily have, even if there is a racial aspect, even if you're like a rich black person, I don't think it exists to the same degree as it does in the South. And like the reason that I bring it up, the context I bring it up for, is that I think that the wealth of an individual can help eradicate the racist or the perception of racist towards that individual. I think that's a reasonable.
And that right there, and so let's have the conversation. Thank you for bringing it up. Mm-hmm. Let me have this conversation briefly. Hang on. My phone did some funny shit. Let's have that conversation briefly, because that's a good one. That the wealth of an individual could potentially eradicate the reception of racism.
I think it does eradicate, at least maybe not fully, but like heavily.
Right. Sure. So what I want you to understand, and I don't want you to view this as an attack on you, but I think as I've seen a couple of your videos, and again, nobody I know, trust me, I'm a TikToker. People think they know me off TikTok. You don't know me.
You feel free to call me out for whatever.
I don't know you either. I'm not claiming to know you just from a few videos, but from like the video we just referenced, which was just a joke at the end. Mm-hmm. The thing is that racism has levels to it. That's what I want everybody, including yourself, to understand.
Sure. And I think I referenced that just before.
Right. And here's the thing. Some people are just they're not there yet. Maybe they're getting there. Maybe they want to get educated to understand the levels of those racism. So some things they do are tone deaf. Mm-hmm. And that sounds derogatory, but I don't mean it that way. So
no. I think that what you're saying is that like I'm either.
Let me clarify the conversation. Sure. The conversation of wealth eradicates racism, and I'm simplifying it, right? Because I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Wealth eradicates racism is a conversation that is harmful in the fight towards racism and is tone deaf.
I don't agree with that. Yeah.
Right, and that's okay. You cannot agree with it, and we can have that conversation. But I'm here to tell you that just because someone is wealthy, that individual on an individual basis could potentially use their money to put themselves in an environment where they don't experience the racism.
Yeah, sure.
But that has done nothing to eradicate racism or to fix racism. So it's a definitive conversation that does no one any good.
Well, sure. But I think
it implies that if you work hard enough, you can stop facing racism.
I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that you've created you've assigned a lot of values to what I'm saying, right? You kind of like you went through a lot, because you went through a lot. So I'm not saying that. Right. So we have individual black people who are performing very well, right? So they're able to escape racism, right? I'm not saying that people there's not enough opportunity for black people to just simply work off the pit, like everything going on, right? I think that we both agree with that. Like there's no way for them to generate generational wealth. So you can't work hard enough to outpace like the class that they're put in. I'm not saying it's going to eradicate racism. What I'm saying is that if we can distribute it like heavily in a way that greatly embolds like black, even poor people in general, but black Americans, then you're going to see a drastic reduction in racism. And like there's no perfect solution. So if we're going to start anywhere, here's my argument, because before you were kind of alluding to it, and I'm just going to be blunt about what I think you were trying to say, is you were saying that I am at the very least racially ignorant in some of the things that I say, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair criticism, right? I've noticed myself going in a weird direction, especially as of late, that I'm not particularly proud of. Just for context, I reached out to iSpeak to
okay. I like to normalize people being wrong. I like to normalize.
Sure, yeah. No, so my point is though, like, I want to talk to the iSpeak about the takes and whatnot. I think that would be probably a better person to talk to, and you would agree because we were talking about like the
black community again.
Right. What I would say, and this isn't an excuse for me, as I'm saying that if I was the worst case scenario of racism, black people would be better off. And I know that doesn't mean that I don't need to work on my shit, because clearly I do, right? I need to make sure that I'm more responsible. And if I do make some kind of a joke, it needs to be better received and it has to have more of a positive impact. Like not even 2 months ago, I was much more progressive, like defending things like this. And I've gotten in a weird spot with my platform where I've been trying to make very vague takes and not really put a perspective on it, but then also throwing in a joke that it's very obviously tone deaf. But like my point is that like if the redistribution aspect, I think, is like very, very, very important. And I think that it won't kill racism, but it would do more than anything else to defeat racism, giving Black people money, the ability to stand up for themselves. Because I think that one of the most criminal things that we've done in America is we've robbed Black people of money. And then that has created a disproportionate amount of violence in those communities due to like the necessity to feed their family, right? So they turn to violence and crime. I think that we could agree with that, right? And then also we've decided that because now we've created an environment that they're going to cause violence at a greater rate, now we could take away their guns. And so we've done this great thing where we've completely disarmed Black people financially and literally in general, right? And yeah, no,
right.
go ahead.
I want to cut you off, but I don't want to get too deep, so I forget to reply to a couple things.
Sure.
So here's what you're addressing. Here's why I agree and disagree with you simultaneously. Mm-hmm. Money will never solve racism, so that's where we disagree.
I think it will. I think it will be a phenomenal start to solving racism.
Let me explain. What you're describing, what you just described, was basically the school to prison pipeline. 22% of Black America lives in poverty. Meanwhile, only 9% of white America lives in poverty. Yeah. And obviously, one of the key proponents to crime is poverty. And so that's what you're describing. I understand that. But so that's oppression. That's systemic oppression that was obviously created and perpetuated by the existence of racism. Mm-hmm. And so can we solve the systemic oppressive issues by using wealth redistribution? That's a great step towards that. Sure. However, racism in it of itself. Let me give you an example. If you send a resume in to a company and you have a traditional Black name on it, you will get a 1 in 15 callback versus a traditional white name.
For sure.
No redistribution of wealth is going to change that.
But actually, I would like to kind of, because I understand what you're saying, because my argument's not we're going to eradicate.
I lost him.
Are we good?
Oh, you're back.
Okay. No, that's okay. I saw the jump in the thing. I just want to stop. I want to stop right there because I think that there's like a way. I have a perception of this issue that's a little bit different, maybe. Like I'm not saying we're going to eradicate racism by redistributing wealth. I'm saying that is the best and like most impactful step towards eradicating racism. You talked about people denying people opportunities when they have like a traditional Black name, right? And like we were saying before with the gun thing, I was talking about how like we've done this thing in America where we've denied Black people of opportunities. We've created an environment that they have to, that like their crime has to go on to provide for your family. And then we've denied them guns, right? What I'm saying is if we get to the root of these things, we tackle the root of these issues, we would be much better off. Like, unfortunately, stereotypes in America that exist with some kind of a basis. Like we just said before, the basis of like denial. And it all roots back to systemic racism. What I'm saying is if we can eradicate a lot of the stereotypes by providing money to people. There's a stereotype that Black people are uneducated. And then again,
that's a very typical white.
No, but hold on. Let me just finish my point. Right? What I'm trying to say is like there's a stereotype that Black people are uneducated. And the reason that stereotype exists is because as America, we have removed education from Black people. Right. So if we focus on getting rid of these systems or improving these systems that allow stereotypes to stand up, we're going to be able to eradicate those stereotypes.
Which is why we should ban the Confederate flag. See, so what I'm saying, here's what I made. Now that was a joke, right? So this is how we tie jokes.
Sure. Okay.
So let me just say this because again, using your phrase, I understand what you're saying is well intentioned, but again, I'm telling you.
Well, I don't think it's just well-intentioned. I think that what I'm saying has a lot of weight to it.
I think it's tone deaf to racism. Let me explain. Let me just explain.
Hold on, really quick. What is it that's tone deaf to racism? Then, from what I said,
the idea of what you're presenting. That okay. So let me explain. It'll be easier.
I just really quick. What is it what idea am I presenting to reduce racism? That's
so to Reader's Digest version that if we use money to counter the effects that's systemic oppression has created, then it will ipso facto reverse the stereotypes created by or for Black Americans, which will ipso facto create. I understand what you're saying, and that is incorrect. Because let me explain to you, and it may be that you don't have the exposure to how racism is taught and how racist ideologies are created. Let me say very firmly, the stereotypes we have about Black Americans are rooted in no fact. So what you suggested in your conversation is that okay, like
but
you said,
I never suggested that it was rooted in any fact.
You said because we've denied the black community access to the same education as white community,
Yeah.
then there's a stereotype that they're not as smart as white Americans. No. That stereotype exists because white Americans are a bunch of racist assholes, not because we denied anybody education.
Wait, so wait. So you're saying we don't deny education to black communities?
Well, no, we definitely do, but that's not the basis of stereotype.
No, I know, but that's still a basis of the stereotype, and I would argue.
That's where
sure.
It's tone deaf. That's where it's tone deaf.
I don't think it's tone deaf to suggest that we've denied education to black people, and that like if we gave hold on. I don't think it's tone deaf to say that we've denied education to black people, and that by providing that education will help.
I'm not saying that's tone deaf. I'm saying that.
But that's what I'm saying.
To believe that is the basis of a stereotype is the tone deaf part.
Yeah, I think that is I think that's
the basis of a stereotype. Fix the education system, that white people will suddenly stop saying those things.
That's not what I think. No, that's not what I think. I use the education system as an example, and before I'm
using it as an equal example.
No. I know, but you're saying that that's all I think is that we need to fix the education system, and we both know that there's far more issues. Like there's far more tangible issues that we can correct. Wealth redistribution, education system, the healthcare system, the jail system, the drug system.
Let me say this to you, maybe to help you understand my argument a little bit better.
Sure.
Let's go back to my childhood because it's a lot easier just to draw on relevant experience. So my dad told me, no bullshit, on a pretty much daily basis, because we use the N-word. N-word is a very common word in our house, very common word around where I live. No big deal. Everybody said it. It was just like any other word. Mm-hmm. And I was told without any caveats or qualifications that black people were lazy, mm-hmm. black people were drug dealers, and they were criminals. Okay, mm-hmm. and that they all lived on welfare. That's what I was told as a child. Now, ironically, in the most palpable irony of history, my dad dealt drugs out of our house, which is obviously criminal, and we lived on welfare, and we were dirt poor. So while simultaneously living in the same exact condition as the black people that my dad hated, and I was taught to hate, those stereotypes existed, but they didn't exist about white people. So what I'm saying is, what I would like to, if you take anything away from this argument, I'm just asking you, even in your own time, to reflect on this concept, that the belief that, or the thought that these stereotypes are rooted in some type of tangible basis is actually incorrect. These stereotypes were just created by racists and then perpetuated through action. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Sure.
And so I'm just saying to you,
sure,
wealth and reparations can help fix the effects of oppression, but when it comes to racism, we have to attack that from an idealistic standpoint.
I 100% understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying, okay, actually I have a question. Do you think that effective wealth redistribution that would give money and power, because money is literally power in America, do you think that effective wealth redistribution would make it more difficult for racism to exist?
No.
I disagree fundamentally. Yeah, I think that I understand exactly what you're saying. That there is like an ingrainment issue as well. There's like an issue where like we have it ingrained in our system. It seems, especially in the South, where it's much worse. I 100% agree. But I genuinely think that if we gave black people money and power and the ability to defend themselves, guns, it would have.
Let me tell you what the white community is going to do.
Hold on. Just let me finish a point, because you have probably talked substantially more than me, which is totally fine. But let me finish a point, because every time you interrupt me,
talk about this house. Go ahead.
Sure, it's fine. It would give. Let's see. I lost my point a little bit. If you give money, guns, power to the black community, and like education, they would be. I think it would be a huge first step in eradicating racism.
Right, and I've heard your point on that.
Yeah,
and
I think
why I disagree.
I know,
racism is an idea.
But let me ask you a question: Are rich people in America, or rich black people in America, doing better than poor black people in America?
Are they doing better?
Yeah.
In terms of
just in general. Do you think that rich black people are receiving less racism than poor black people?
As I am neither a rich black person nor a poor black person, I can't speak to that quantifiably.
I would make a pretty reasonable assumption that the wealth does help black people. And so, like, I think that's
an assumption. That's only an assumption, and quantifiably can probably.
I know, but I think it's a pretty reasonable assumption.
I disagree. Understanding racist and how racism works, it's just not true.
So do you think that part of the solution would be to give like black people money?
To solve the effects of systemic oppression, equity is important to equality.
So
yes.
yeah, isn't that systemic oppression is racist, right? So wouldn't it fight racism if we gave black people money by your own logic?
No, that's not my logic at all. Oppression is not oppression and racism are intertwined in their
right, which means that systemic oppression. Well, is systemic oppression racist?
Is a result of racism.
So it's racist.
It's a result of racism.
So it's racist, yeah. So if systemic oppression is racist, then removing systemic oppression would remove racism.
Not remove racism.
No. You're doing a very tricky thing here. You're trying. No. Hold on. You're trying. Hold on. Hold on. What you're trying to do is say, because I say that it will remove some racism, that you're trying to make it seem like I'm saying it will remove all racism, and I'm not. What I'm saying is that it will remove, or it will aid to the removal of racism, absolutely, by giving black people like money and power. Yeah. That will remove some racism, not all racism, but it's a phenomenal start.
Okay, let me see if I can put it into a different perspective. Here's why I disagree with you. I don't think it's a start. I don't think it's even the right. Racism and oppression and equity, these are different conversations. It's like this. It's like if putting seatbelts in cars didn't make people better drivers. It just made crashes safer, right? So
okay.
The chicken came before the egg, however you want to put it. Racism led to oppression. Erasing oppression takes away the symptom of the disease. It does nothing to solve the disease. And so I understand where your sentiment is. Your sentiment is that if we're on an even playing field, then less people are going to look down on other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And that idea right there is
do you think that's true?
Is misunderstanding. No, I don't think that's true, because you're misunderstanding. The idea of racism, period, is that what I just told you, that my father.
I know exactly what you're saying, and like I just want to be clear. I want to be clear. That's it. You've given me a lot of anecdotes, right? And like totally fair, understandable that there are like just fundamentally racist people, absolutely, and like there is a system of oppression that's outside of money. What I'm saying is that the money will make a profoundly positive impact. There are people who are racist because they actually believe that there is something inherent about black people that makes them like poor and violent. What I'm saying is if we can remove those systems, like provide money to black people, it will heavily reduce the ability to use those stereotypes, because those stereotypes are completely unfounded. Black people and white people are just fundamentally the same, honestly. Like, correct. Yes. And that's so what I'm saying is if we providing the education, the opportunity, and it goes even deeper, because if we provide the education and opportunity to black people, that means that they themselves, the ones that experience these things in these communities, are going to be able to be platformed, because they're going to have the education to actually go into politics. What I'm saying is that like the money aspect is more important, I think, than you're letting on. I'm not saying it's the whole thing, but I'm saying it's a big factor.
I think that the ideology in people's mind is what has led us to where we are, and throwing money at a problem is a traditional white solution that has done nothing.
But I don't think that. But so in what way have we thrown money at the problem? Because there's a difference between throwing money at the problem and like implementing like positive. So what's an example of throwing money at the problem? Because
okay, I'll give you a small time example. The nice white lady who really believes that black people should receive equality, so she writes a check for the local NAACP chapter.
Sure,
that's throwing money at the problem.
But that's not where my solution is, right? So like that.
I understand. Yours is the systemic throwing money at the problem across the board. I get it, but I'm just telling you the problem is.
Right. So what does it look like other than like this example of somebody writing a check? What are the other ways in which we have, as America, have just thrown money at the problem?
We have addressed the symptoms of diseases.
Well, sure, no, but just what are the ways in which we've thrown money at the problem?
I mean, it's a long list, man. I mean, it's a
just complex. Give me one. Give me one.
Affirmative action.
Sure, yeah, and so affirmative action is flawed. Now, do you know, like, why is affirmative action flawed?
Because more white women have benefited from it than minorities.
Sure, so the actual reason that affirmative action is flawed is because it focuses too much on outcomes and not enough on opportunities, right? So when I talk about opportunity, for putting money into opportunities for black people, I'm clearly improving on the throwing money at the problem thing, right? So what other system have we just thrown money at the problem?
So what I'm not going to do is I have articulate conversation about. Give me a bulleted list of all the times that we throw money.
No, I just so like because the reason that I'm doing I know
that racism led to oppression.
Okay, no, I know, I understand that.
Racism, period.
I understand that, but like what I'm saying is that we need to put money in the right places, and what you're doing is purely dismissing it to double down on your own perspective.
Okay, I've said multiple times I agree with you on wealth redistribution. I agree with you on reparations.
Right, but then you're saying that like, oh, just throwing money at the problem doesn't help. So you're being logically inconsistent.
You've said multiple times it's the first step to. It's a great first step into solving racism.
Absolutely.
I'm definitely trying to talk about that point. Maybe if you understood how the point I'm trying to make, you wouldn't make the off-color jokes that you made the other day. Like I'm
sure, and
you,
I
bro,
know that it's easy to like pivot. No. I know that it's an easy pivot to go back to like the jokes. I totally get it. But like again, it's you very tactfully.
I'm not looking for a gotcha moment.
I'm not even going to put any of these stuff on Twitter on TikTok. Like I don't do clips. Like I think that they're completely dishonest. No, but so there's no gotcha moment to have. What I'm saying.
Here's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to have a gotcha moment either.
No,
I'm telling you.
Sure, I agree with you.
That joke as a way to punch you. I'm saying you said yourself.
Sure.
That I got to learn to be better about making these jokes. What I'm saying is, I'm trying to help you understand that to think that
I know, but you
solves racism or works towards it is misunderstanding what racism is. That's
but I think. I don't think it's misunderstanding what racism is. I just don't think that you agree with my solution. What I was saying before. Well, hold on.
I like wealth redistribution, reparations, and putting empowering the Black community financially. I love that.
Yeah, and I think that would be a great step towards reducing racism because that's
what we disagree fundamentally.
Yeah, because like a lot of people are racist because they think that Black people are like actually inferior when they're not, and like there isn't. Okay, Let's like hold on. Let me just
so emotional about this.
No, I know. Just let me get a point then. Okay. So I think that we're throwing. Let me see that this is the correct term. I think we're throwing racists into a vacuum, right? We're generalizing all racists, right? There are different types of racists. Very clearly, you have, and this is actually maybe this is our disconnect here. Very clearly, the racists that you've been introduced to are more idealized or more ideal driven, right? And the racists I've come into contact with are more driven by the stereotypes. And so maybe that's our disconnect.
I know. I thought I had the phone off, sorry.
That was okay, no problem. And so there are people, I know it for a fact that there are a lot of racists who focus on the stereotypes over the actual believing that Black people are inferior, if that makes sense. Because again, in the North, we don't have, or at the very least, if we do, it's not nearly as prevalent. We don't have the same, like, I guess, systems of oppression up here. Because you said it was much more ingrained. Like, we don't have the Confederate flag or the championing of racists, in our history, like Robert E. Lee. So maybe that's the disconnect. Yeah, sure.
Here's where I think the disconnect is. Here's why I'm so emotionally driven about this particular topic. Is your understanding of what you're saying. So in the North, they're more about the stereotypes. Racism is racism. And yes, there's different there's a sliding scale. And I understand what you're saying about putting them in a vacuum. What I'm saying to you is this, that stereotypes do not exist because of conditions. Stereotypes exist because of ignorance. And because of
but I do disagree with that because there are a lot of stereotypes that exist. I know there are. I think that it's a mixture between both, and I think that like I'm acknowledging that, and I don't think that you're acknowledging that. There's an issue of both, right? Like it's unfortunate, but like again, there's disproportionately higher crime in Black communities.
Give me an example of a stereotype that exists out of reality.
What do you mean out of reality?
So I'm saying that stereotypes exist out of ignorance, not out of circumstances. You're saying the circumstances of people are creating stereotypes.
I didn't say create stereotypes. I said upholding stereotypes.
Okay, so the stereotype existed before the circumstance?
Probably, sure, yeah. So
changing the circumstance won't change the stereotype.
Well, no, the circumstance. Like again, I said upholding. So like if you reinforce the stereotype. Hold on. If you reinforce the stereotype. If you remove the reinforcement of the stereotype, you remove a lot of the ability for people to utilize that stereotype. Like I'm talking about removing the reinforcement of the stereotype. Yeah.
that idea is what you're doing is you're giving racist and racism a free pass.
I don't think that's true at all.
But you are.
No,
You're saying if we fix the circumstance of black people, then these
okay, I figured out the biggest problem here, right? So okay, I figured out the biggest problem here, because I don't think that I'm wrong at all. I think that you're conflating my disagreement with your solution with a disagreement to idyllic solutions, right? I personally, and like, I'm much more on board with your solution actually. Now after we had this conversation.
Sure.
But like, just because I may not agree with that doesn't mean that I don't agree with things like implicit bias training or whatever else we would need, like or removing the Confederate flag as well, right? That doesn't mean that I don't agree. And like, again, I understand, but I'm not saying that the only solution is to empower black people. I'm saying that it is a start. No. I know. I think that like what you think I'm saying is like we shouldn't focus on the idyllic, or we shouldn't focus on like the actual what you think it seems like what you think I'm saying is we shouldn't focus on black issues outside of finance. What I am saying is I don't think
you're saying that.
But what I'm saying is I think that we need to focus on the finance because it would be massive in reducing racism.
What I was trying to do, and maybe I did so poorly, so I'll try another way. What I was trying to do was focus on something you said, because I believe words are egregiously important.
Sure.
And that when you state that the idea of stereotypes not being upheld when circumstances are erased, I just think it shows, and this word has negative connotation, I don't mean negative, I think it shows ignorance of the racial issue.
Maybe.
And I wanted to address that because I do think it's an important thing to talk about. Because so often in this country, we try to address the symptoms of the disease and never address the disease. And that's why I focused on it. Do I think you would be on board for other ideas beyond wealth? Yes, I do think that. You've clearly demonstrated that. I'm not trying to dismiss your wealth redistribution idea. I'm saying that solves the equity issue and the results of oppression. It does nothing in the way of addressing racism. I'm saying nothing.
But the thing is, right. So we live in a very different time. Okay, so we live in a very different time than we used to. Everything on paper, black people are equal on paper. It's illegal to not, it's illegal to be racist, right? Now in practice, clearly we still have these systems. But like, we have removed a lot. We've done a lot. That's very much like a social progression. We've done a lot for social progression. And I'm saying that we've hit a point where with that social progression, do we have more? Absolutely. But like now with the redistribution of wealth, alongside that social progression that we've already hit, that it's going to have a profoundly positive impact on reducing all the not just stereotypes, but giving black people the power to defend themselves. A lot of the issues that black people face are like, they're very different, like the inability to afford good lawyers, the inability to actually be able to purchase firearms because of where they're in, the inability to actually pay for a ticket. There's so many different ways in which like money will fight racism. I'm not saying that like it's the only thing. What I'm saying is that there are so many degrees here that I think that we as a society have this idea that like money doesn't really solve everything, and like you don't need money to be happy. You 100% do. Like over 50% of divorces come from the lack of ability to have money, right? So I think that we need to like consider money as more of an issue as we do now. And like, I absolutely, especially after this conversation, I'm much more on board with like banning the Confederate flag. I still have my hesitations because of the satisfaction/violence argument that I brought up before, but I'm much more on board. And in fact, I'm more on board on, we'll say it, more idyllic solutions in general. In general, but I do genuinely think that providing money and power to black people will help them like phenomenally, like an incredible amount.
And I appreciate that you're on board with that, because I believe.
Just for that was like my closing statement, because I think we've gone pretty far. If you want, you close, and then that's what I say. Like you close I close with mine, you close with yours, and then if you want, we could actually talk about different types of reparation. That's up to you.
Right. So I actually am glad to hear many people on board with wealth redistribution, with reparations, with that kind of thing, because oppression is the result, or systemic oppression is the result of systemic racism. But part of what I do, part of what I aim to do, and I needed to get, and I'm actually about to start using YouTube for the purpose of making longer videos. What I aim to do is exactly what you and I did just here. Mm-hmm. I want us to have these uncomfortable conversations because there's lots of people with our community, white people, that don't understand the ideological roots of racism.
Sure.
We don't understand how racism. A lot of white people feel like racism is a light switch. If you're racist, you're racist. If you're not, you're not. If I got a black friend, I'm not racist. Light switch is off. And that's how a lot of white people view racism. When in fact, it's like you and I were just discussing. There's a sliding scale of how racist.
Let's just be clear. From what I've gathered from today, it seems like with that sliding scale of racism, like I'm more racist than you are. Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary to even.
That's what I would classify it as, honestly.
I don't think superlatives are necessary towards.
No, I'm not saying it as like well, I mean, it's not a good thing to be racist, but I'm saying is that like after this conversation, there's a lot that I didn't understand. I'm sorry for cutting off your statement. And it's like, well, you're talking about a sliding scale of racism, where like at the very least, I'm more racially ignorant than you, right? So like, I think that I'm just trying to reinforce your point because I actually agree with what you're saying.
I don't know you well enough to make that statement, but I think maybe I've been having this conversation for 20 years. Something I don't talk about on my platform is my mom and my dad divorced. I'll make this short. They divorced when I was 3 years old. My mom got remarried to a black man. All of my siblings are black, and I spent a large part of my teenage years in a black community with black siblings. And I was introduced to these conversations early, and I've been having them for over 20 years. And I do think I have enough, not enough. I have a lot of exposure to have deeper levels of these conversations. So on that sliding scale, I hope it has helped me a lot. And I hope that goes back to what I was saying. I want to use my platform to do that.
Sure.
To have these conversations that we misunderstand as white Americans how to solve racism, because while I love your idea of reparations and wealth redistribution, I don't want it to be conflated with the solution towards racism. And that's what I try to use my platform for.
Sure.
Is that type of ideological education.
Okay, that's fair. So I don't know if you want to talk about forms of reparations or if you want to just end it here. We could actually, maybe we should talk about that another day.
Yeah, you know what? Let's schedule a time to do that because it'd be a great conversation.
Sure, yeah, sorry.
Because you know what? It's important to have that conversation because so many people think that when we say reparations, we're just saying, here's some money.
Yeah, and I think it gets very off track, and like there's different conversations to have, and there's a lot of subtleties to it, and like I think that if you make a YouTube, let me know. I'm just opened up a political Discord if you want to join. It's just a Discord for political creators. But the intention is to get a bunch of political creators so that people want to have debates or conversations about something. It's very easy to access. You just pop out there and say, hey, listen, I want to talk about this. There's not a whole lot of people in it yet. I just started it yesterday. You're welcome to invite whoever you want, as long as they're like respectful. They don't have to be huge names, but so let me know. We'll talk about that after.
Well, I appreciate you forcing me to use Discord today because I've been wanting to do it.
It's a very easy, because it has a lot of levels to it where like there's like little forums where you can like have a community, and like it makes it a lot easier for a lot of things, and that's why I like using Discord a lot.
Yeah, I think now that I've done this, I'm going to try to explore it some more.
Yeah, and let me know.
Definitely join your political Discord.
Sure.
And I appreciate you having me on your platform. I appreciate you having me on your stream.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're going to put this up on your YouTube. That might not be a bad idea. So I'm going to put it up on mine, so that would be good. Okay. Well, I appreciate you stopping by. That was actually a very educational conversation. So,
and I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate us listening. And this is how we have conversation without people fighting. So that was good.
Yeah, right. Now that gets a little heated. So you take care, right?
You too. Thank you.
All right. So that was a lot there. Interesting conversation. There's a lot there that I say. Now, I'm not going to say that I disagree. I still think that wealth redistribution is the most impactful aspect, but I actually think that, and this might be like the space that I'm in, I think that there is a disconnect. I think that there's a disconnect from how different the North and the South is, and how different the issues are within the North and the South, and how easy it is for Northern people to have like particular perceptions of like racism. It's very interesting. Because like I would say, like what I got out of that is what I would say that up north, my solution probably be massively impactful, and probably I would even argue eradicate racism, because like racism around here is very different. Because in the South, it seems very much like it's not just like a Confederate flag reclamation. There seems to be a genuine supporting of racism in the South and white supremacy in a way that I don't think that I understand because of my environment. It's very interesting. It's a lot to take in there. It's a lot to take in on that. Did he ever give us a solution on what's better than wealth redistribution? So he like I was just saying that there seems to be more of like an ideological problem in the South. Right. So what I would say, like if I had to like fix my solution, I guess, I would still start with wealth redistribution. So I would still start with wealth redistribution in the South. Maybe I wouldn't necessarily. No, I think I would. I think that it needs to be like alongside of. I think it needs to be wealth redistribution plus what he's saying. As far as I forgot to bring, this is the one thing I forgot to bring up towards the end, is that like I think it would be a better step, and hopefully he's listening. My biggest thing, I think it would be a better step to move forward, banning the displaying of Confederate flags on public buildings. I think that would be better. Only because I think that would be a more reason. Like I think that you'd be able to implement that more. Not because I think it's actually better. Actually, I think that banning the Confederate flag. I actually, at this point, when I mentioned UBI, that'll be something for another day. At this point, I think I'm on board with the banning of the Confederate flag. I'm still hesitant about the outcome of satisfaction versus violence, right? Like the progressives finding satisfaction enough to not give a fuck about black people afterwards, and the violence aspect of like the controlling, like the actors, the racist actors within the system being able to shit on black people more. I know that sounds so crazy, but like, okay, for instance, like let's say like there seems to be much worse systemic problems in the South, right? That's very clear now. So like let's say a police officer loves the Confederate flag, right? He loves the Confederate flag, and he's like, "Oh, I really like this flag," but now they banned it. Well, I don't like black people, so I'm going to blame black people, and so now I'm going to start ticketing more, and that's an act of violence onto the black community. Like that's what I'm worried about more than anything else. That's what I'm worried about more than anything else, right? Is like that propagation of hatred or harm onto like the black community. Yeah, it's so interesting because people are like, yeah, it's a freedom of speech issue. I understand that. I do understand that, and like this, I think that there probably is an argument to like a slip. That's why I say that I think it'd be more reasonable or more practical. Not even reasonable. I think actually it's very reasonable to ban the Confederate flag, but based on like our systems in place, I think it would be more practical to start with public buildings. Does that make sense? Yeah. No, I think that this actually makes a lot of sense.